Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive with us. I know December was a wild month, so we're going to try to break down all the biggest stories for you.
Yeah, a lot happened.
Like everything from, tech stocks going crazy to coffee shortage.
And we can't forget about the Fed.
Oh, yeah, that too.
Everyone was waiting to see what they do with interest rates.
So many moving pieces last month.
Absolutely.
Well, let's dive right in. First up, those magnificent 7 tech giants. Everybody's talking about them. Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Tesla. I mean, they completely dominated the S&P 500.
It was pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
The whole S&P only went up like 0.7% in December.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the Magnificent Seven, they surged over 12%.
Jeez. So is that all thanks to holiday shopping?
Well, partly, but the bigger story is AI. It's completely transforming how businesses operate.
Okay, so I get that AI is a big deal, but why should I care? How does this impact me?
Well, think about it. Every time you use your phone or search online, AI is working behind the scenes.
And companies like Broadcom are making the chips that power all that. They're basically the suppliers for this whole AI gold rush.
Ah,
Broadcom's revenue actually jumped over 200% this past year,
wow.
and they just hit a market cap of $1 trillion.
$1 trillion. That's insane. But is it sustainable? I mean, is this AI hype gonna last?
That's the million-dollar question. Some experts are saying the market might be getting a little ahead of itself.
Makes sense.
Remember, these companies are valued based on their future potential. And that's not always a sure thing.
Right.
Even back in December, Vanguard was warning investors about a possible correction in AI-related stocks.
So it's not all sunshine and rainbows then?
Not necessarily.
Which brings us to the Federal Reserve. Everyone was on the edge of their seats waiting for their December meeting.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
Were they going to cut rates again? And by how much?
Exactly, it was the big question. In the end, they cut rates by 1/4 percentage point,
Okay.
which seemed like good news at first.
Right.
But then their messaging kind of threw everyone off.
Yeah. They basically hinted that they might slow down those rate cuts in 2025. What was that about?
Well, it seems like they got a little worried about inflation.
Ah.
You see, they're trying to balance stimulating the economy with keeping inflation under control. It's a delicate dance.
And then there's the whole global situation to consider, too. December was a pretty crazy month on the world stage.
Oh, absolutely. Lots of uncertainty.
The Syria-Israel conflict was still going on. We had those new trade restrictions on China.
Right.
And even France had some major political drama.
Right. It was a lot for investors to digest.
Yeah. All that uncertainty makes people nervous.
Exactly. And when investors get nervous, they tend to pull back, which can make the markets even more volatile.
So basically, all this global drama was just adding fuel to the fire.
You could say that.
Oh, and speaking of things heating up, we can't forget about that coffee crisis. My morning latte practically doubled in price.
I know, right? It seems like coffee was caught in the crossfire of all that global uncertainty, too.
Really? But how?
Well, there was some bad weather in a few major coffee-producing countries.
Like where?
Like Brazil and Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
Their crops were hurt pretty badly.
So less coffee to go around.
Exactly. And at the same time, global demand for coffee kept rising. It was the perfect recipe for a price spike.
Wow. So even my morning coffee is tied to all these global events. Crazy.
It just goes to show how interconnected everything is.
Well, that's a pretty good overview of December, I think. It was definitely a wild ride with lots of twists and turns.
Definitely a lot to unpack.
And we're just getting started.
Yeah, we've only scratched the surface.
In the next part of our deep dive, we'll look at how companies were reacting to all this madness.
Oh, yeah. We'll see how they were adapting their strategies and making big bets on the future.
Stay tuned, folks. It's about to get even more interesting.
Absolutely. Buckle up.
All right, so buckle up, folks. We'll be right back with part 2 of this deep dive into December 2024.
Don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
December wasn't just about, reacting to what was happening in the markets. Companies had to make some pretty big decisions.
Right. Decisions that would, shape their future.
Exactly. They had to be strategic about it.
So who's making those big moves?
Well, Microsoft, for one, they were going all in on AI.
Yeah.
Investing heavily in infrastructure. They were buying up NVIDIA's Hopper chips like crazy.
Those are the ones specifically for AI, right?
Yep. And reportedly, they were buying twice as many as anyone else.
Wow. So they really see AI as, the future of computing.
It seems that way. What about other tech giants? Were they doing the same?
Good question.
Well, some were more cautious.
Wow.
Amazon Web Services, for example, they decided not to offer AMD's latest AI chips.
Really? Why not?
They said they just weren't seeing enough customer demand yet.
Interesting. So even within the tech world, there were different levels of like confidence about AI.
Yeah, some were ready to jump in with both feet. Others were taking a more wait-and-see approach.
Makes sense. It's a big gamble.
It is. And it wasn't just tech companies making big moves either. BP, for example, announced a major investment in a natural gas project.
I remember that one. But didn't that project include some controversial carbon capture technology?
It did. Which was interesting because BP had been criticized for being slow to embrace renewables.
Right.
So this investment was maybe their way of trying to, balance things
Well,
out.
it's trying to show they were taking climate change seriously.
Exactly.
Yeah.
While still, profiting from fossil fuels.
It's a tough position for those energy companies.
It is. They're facing pressure from all sides.
And then there's OPEC Plus. They had those meetings in December but couldn't agree on production levels.
Oh, yeah. That was another big source of uncertainty for the energy market.
Right. They're trying to figure out how much oil to pump without, like, crashing the market.
Exactly. And at the same time, you had Trump's oil sanctions against Iran and Venezuela.
Which could, like, really tighten up the supply.
It was a delicate balancing act.
Oh, and speaking of delicate balancing acts, remember how the French parliament voted to oust their prime minister?
Oh, yeah.
That was a wild
Over his proposed budget cuts.
And it sent shockwaves through the European markets.
Because investors get spooked by political instability. Exactly.
Yeah.
It makes things unpredictable and risky.
Right. So even though France's economy is strong, that political drama made people nervous.
And it wasn't just France either. Remember Trump's comments about firing federal employees who didn't return to the office?
Oh, yeah. That whole return to office debate, was that still going on in December?
It was. And it was causing a lot of tension.
Because some people loved working from home.
Right. They got used to the flexibility.
And others, like Trump, were all about that traditional office culture.
It was a real clash of values and work styles.
And it had economic implications, too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about all the businesses that had sprung up around remote work.
Like the coffee shops and co-working spaces.
Exactly. A sudden shift back to the office would have been a big disruption.
Wow. It's amazing how something like where people work can have such a ripple effect.
It's all connected.
But let's bring it back to AI for a sec.
Right.
Remember how we talked about some experts starting to sound the alarm?
Oh, yeah. Even amidst all the excitement, some people were getting a little worried.
Like they thought maybe the hype was getting out of control.
Right. Remember what happened with Adobe?
Their stock took a hit.
Yep. Because investors were concerned about their ability to compete against all these new AI-powered startups.
So it wasn't a guaranteed win for the big players?
Not at all. Those smaller companies were moving fast and innovating quickly.
Which meant the giants had to step up their game.
Absolutely. They couldn't afford to get complacent.
So December was full of these kind of like contradictions.
Yeah, lots of ups and downs, opportunities and risks.
But one thing that seemed pretty constant was the U.S. economy. It just kept chugging along.
It did, despite all the global uncertainty and political drama.
Strong consumer spending, healthy job market, continued investment in key sectors.
The U.S. seemed to be weathering the storm better than most.
But I guess we'll have to see how things play out in the long term.
That's right. Economic cycles are always changing.
So what can we take away from all this? What does it all mean?
Well, in the final part of our deep dive, we'll try to answer those questions.
We'll look at the long-term implications of December's events and what they might mean for you.
So stay tuned. We've got a lot more to cover.
Okay, so we've talked about AI, we've talked about the Fed, global unrest, even coffee prices. What's the big takeaway from all this? What does December tell us about where things are headed?
It's a great question. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day headlines.
Yeah.
But December really highlighted some of those underlying trends that are shaping the future.
Like what?
Well, in tech, for example. Even though those big giants are still, dominant,
right,
their success is kind of creating this new wave of competition.
So it's not just a story about big tech winning anymore.
Right. It's more nuanced than that. Think of it like this. The bigger the tree, the more shade it casts. And in that shade, new saplings can start to grow.
So we need to be watching those smaller companies too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The ones that are innovating quickly, especially in areas like AI.
Okay, so those smaller companies are like nipping at the heels of the giants.
You could say that.
Which means the big companies have to keep innovating just to stay ahead.
Precisely. It's a constant race.
And it's happening really fast.
Yeah, the pace of change is incredible. And it's not just limited to tech either.
What do you mean?
Well, think about Shell's decision to halt those offshore wind projects.
Right. That was a big deal. It seemed like a step back from renewable energy.
It did. But it also reflects how complex this energy transition really is.
So it's not just a simple flip of a switch.
No, definitely not.
Hmm.
There's still a lot of uncertainty about which technologies will be most viable in the long run.
And I guess companies like Shell are trying to figure out where to place their bets.
Exactly. They're having to make some tough choices.
And speaking of tough choices, remember how the EU was discussing that huge defense fund?
Oh, yeah.
That was interesting.
It seemed like a sign that countries are feeling the need to, band together.
Yeah. It's part of this bigger trend toward a multipolar world.
Multipolar.
It basically means that power is shifting away from a single dominant country. Okay, so instead of one superpower calling all the shots, we're seeing multiple power centers emerge.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
And that has big implications for how everything works, from trade to geopolitics.
So companies and countries have to be able to navigate this more complex landscape.
Exactly. It's a whole new ballgame.
Wow. Okay, so we've got tech evolving at warp speed, the energy sector going through a major transformation, and the global power structure shifting beneath our feet.
That's a lot.
But one thing that remained pretty stable in December was the U.S. economy.
That's right. It continued to perform well despite all the uncertainty in the world.
So, like a beacon of stability.
In a way,
Yeah. But I guess nothing lasts forever, right?
true economic cycles are constantly changing.
So what does this all mean for our listeners?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that knowledge is power.
Okay.
By staying informed about these trends and how they're interconnected,
Yeah.
you can make better decisions about your investments, your career, even just how you navigate the world.
It's like we've given our listeners a map to the future, or at least a compass.
That's a good way to put it. And remember,
Yeah.
even something as simple as a cup of coffee can be a window into these global forces that are shaping our lives.
So stay curious, stay informed, and maybe enjoy an extra cup of coffee while you're at it.
Sounds like a plan. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.